Everybody, close your eyes and imagine this situation in the future. You have become the ultimate Toastmaster. Decades ago, you completed the highest DTM, Distinguished Toastmaster designation, but you didn't stop there. You went even further to master the craft, and you've done it to a point of perfection that your message is communicated in full 100% integrity and received in its full glory. The intent, the context, the subtleties, everything is received with perfection, and there's no chance for any meaning to be misconstrued, no chance for any misunderstanding. Whatever you intend to communicate is received in exactly that way. It's almost like mind control. Now open your eyes and come back to reality. Reality is that we are not computers networking with each other. We are not robots. We are humans, and what makes us humans are our differences, what makes us individuals, our life experiences, the lessons that we've learned from those experiences, our upbringing, our culture, all of that. And because we're humans and we're different, inevitably these differences can rub against each other and create conflict. But conflict's not necessarily a bad thing. If it's resolved, it can lead to a lot of good things, like greater productivity, greater creativity. You can have team members or people involved bonding and new friendships. But the opposite also holds true. If you don't resolve the conflict, then you will find a lot of less productivity. You'll find anonymity. You're gonna have lower morale. You'll have new enemies. As a leader and a Toastmaster, it's really important for you to know how to resolve conflict, and that's the topic of my presentation today. Starting with some definitions. Definition of conflict is just what you get when two or more people have differences, whether they're real or if they're just perceived differences that are unresolved. And resolving that conflict is conflict resolution. It's what you do in order to identify and address the differences in a respectful and a mature way. There are a lot of different causes of conflict, but I'm going to talk about 4 of them. The first one being contentious personalities. We all know people who are just difficult. You can't stand being around them or working with them. Do you know somebody who starts every conversation out yelling and blaming people, insulting, pointing fingers? Do you know somebody who is the opposite of that, maybe a people pleaser, a fair weather person who's only there around for the good times but not around for the bad times? Do you know somebody who is an egomaniac, who can't stop posting selfies on Facebook? A lot of different kinds of personalities can be labeled as contentious, and those are more conducive to argument or conflict. Another common cause of conflict is misunderstanding. It's so many conflict is just a misunderstanding because people don't have all the facts. And simply getting everybody onto the same page and making sure everyone has the same facts and knows the same thing and understands the context in the same way, it can get rid of the misunderstanding right there. Another common cause of conflict is issues, real issues that people have and disagreements over the way something may be run, policies or decisions. For example, some members in our own Speech Crafters Club before have had concerns about certain topics that are allowed and what may be taboo. For example, we've had concerns potentially about whether it's appropriate to talk about politics or religion during your speeches. That's another common cause of conflict. And then the last one up here is different styles of leadership. You might not like the way I've run this club into the ground over the past year. But there are different types of leadership, obviously, and managers practice one of many. Some examples would be authoritarian or democratic, charismatic leadership, or passive. And everybody resonates with a different style of leadership. And if you don't, and end up rubbing shoulders in a very negative way, can also result in conflict. Similarly, there are a lot of ways of resolving conflict, and we're going to talk about some. It's really important to maintain open communication, and you don't want to ever let your team members or the people involved to degenerate into refusing, pointing fingers and name calling, to degenerate into refusing to work with each other or even to communicate. And that leads us to the first method of resolving conflict, of ignoring it. This is something that I'm guilty of myself sometimes. When I get into a bitter argument with my fiance, I just want to sleep on it. I want to deal with it on my own and cut off communication. And sure enough, sometimes when I wake up, I feel just fine, and I'm happy again, and it feels like the problem was so trivial. And so in some cases, ignoring it could be a perfectly valid approach for resolving conflict. But very often it's not, and if you just leave it unresolved, undealt with, it can fester. Next, smoothing it over, which is basically trying to maintain harmony among the team members and downplaying the conflict in order to preserve the harmony of the group, to prevent arguing. And this can work if it's more important to maintain that goodwill, but sometimes it may end up contradicting your team goals, and maybe you have to try a different method of resolution. Force is another type of another way of resolving conflict, which is perhaps the most appropriate when you're dealing with an emergency situation and you have to make a quick decision. An example of force might have been if I were an authoritarian president, I would have made a unilateral decision to ban all taboo topics from the lectern. You're not allowed to talk about anything that people might potentially find disagreeable. But fortunately, we had a democratic approach, and we took a vote, and we decided to embrace everybody's whatever they found interesting, valuable, and important to their own lives. Another way of resolving conflict is compromise. Compromise is when the parties involved have to make concessions. Everybody loses out somehow in order to come to an agreement. It's basically a lose-lose situation. And consequently, a lot of times, the people, or the team members, or the parties involved don't really have full commitment to the compromise solution because nobody's winning, everybody's unhappy. And then the final method is what I'm going to talk more about, which is collaboration. Collaboration would be the opposite. It's the striving to achieve a win-win situation. And in order to do that, you have to have respect for the other people's needs, and you have to understand their needs and the legitimacy of them. You have to recognize their expertise and their skills and their experiences, and work together in open communication in order to try to find a solution that works for everybody. We'll talk more about this formal process. It seems kind of like something that you might have heard before in a Disney movie, and kind of really obvious, but there's a formal framework for collaboration that I think that if you take it seriously and try to practice it in your everyday life, you'll find that it makes a lot of stuff easier and gives you a recourse when you're facing problems that you don't know how to deal with. First step in this process is finding the root cause of the problem, because a lot of times the symptoms can mask what's really the concern. So the person may be complaining about something, but maybe deep down they feel that maybe this person actually doesn't like me, or maybe I'm afraid about the impression that somebody's going to get. And so you want to try to get down to the root cause. The way you do that, again, is through open communication and allowing everybody to speak their minds. And when you're encouraging everybody's communication, you don't want to interrupt them. You want to let them speak and get it all out, let them vent. But a word of warning, of course, when you're doing this, it can get often very emotional if you're actually in that conflict situation. You don't want to let people get carried away. You don't want them to point fingers. You want to try to be supportive, empathetic, and caring of what they're saying and listen to it. That takes us to the third step for facilitating collaboration. You can't just let everybody vent and air out everything. Everybody's just gabbing away. You also have to let each person take their turn, and everybody has to listen, genuinely listen with an open mind and an open heart. With that, it gives us the ability to identify the areas of disagreement, find out the root causes of people's concern, and then I find the areas of agreement, the areas that we have in common. Maybe you have shared values and shared goals, but maybe you just have different approaches to attaining that. Now that you know what you agree upon, you can search for solutions and get a list of solutions and together reach a consensus. These last two steps can be referred to as the brainstorming method, and it's simply getting everybody's input, writing down everybody's idea for a solution onto a list without giving any immediate snarky feedback or commentary. Just get it all down, and then you go down one by one, evaluating each idea for their pros and cons until you narrow down the list and come to the solution that resolves the problem that everybody can agree upon and like. Conflict is an inevitable part of our lives as human beings and not as robots, because we're different, because we have different norms, different expectations, different life experiences. We're bound to interpret things in different ways, understand things differently, and so much of that is, it can easily be resolved if you practice conflict resolution. So as a Toastmaster, it's your job to facilitate open communication and to encourage people to keep the ultimate goal as their objective, to keep the resolution, to aim for finding a resolution that's satisfactory to everybody as your goal. You want to encourage people to be open-minded and to facilitate that communication. And only in this way will you be able to resolve the conflict so that you can make sure everybody keeps their mind focused on what you're actually supposed to be doing. Maybe what your actual team goal is. You can focus on actually getting your work done. And so knowing how to resolve conflict is something that every leader and Toastmaster needs to be able to practice. Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster.